The headline version of baseball is for everyone. This isn't that. Streakplot Scout goes below the surface. The 40-man decisions, the prospect ETAs, the draft implications hiding inside yesterday's transactions. Built for the people who understand that the game is won before it's played. Let's get into it. The number that defines Michael McGreevy's evaluation right now is not the ERA. The ERA is a mirage. The number is negative 3.45. The gap between what the surface results say and what the contact quality data says is actually happening on the mound. A 2.40 ERA over 56 innings generates attention. It generates fantasy roster decisions. It generates trade value conversations. But a 5.85 xERA over that same sample is a fundamentally different statement about how hitters are making contact with this pitcher's stuff. And when you layer in a 10.7% barrel rate against, a 41.1% hard hit rate, and an 89.0 mile per hour average exit velocity against, you are no longer talking about a pitcher who is being evaluated generously. You are talking about a pitcher who is being hit hard and has not yet been punished for it. Those are different things, and they require different evaluations. Let me put this in a scouting context. A 10.7% barrel rate against is not a fringe number. That sits in territory where you start questioning pitch shape and command precision, not luck. Barrel rate against is the contact quality metric most resistant to BABIP noise. A barrel is a barrel, and when 10.7% of balls in play against a pitcher are barreled, the underlying pitch design is the first thing I want to examine. Pair that with a 41.1% hard hit rate against, and you have a pitcher whose stuff is being squared up at a rate that should, under normal run-scoring conditions, be producing significantly more damage than a 2.40 ERA reflects. The fact that it isn't is the strand-luck story. Runners aren't coming around to score at the rate the contact quality predicts. That is a timing issue, not a skill issue, and timing normalizes. McGreevy grades out on the tools side as a fringy starter to me right now. Let's build that assessment from the fastball down. He's sitting at 91.4 miles per hour. That's down 1.6 miles per hour from last season. That's a meaningful velocity drop for a starter who is not a true command and craft profile. If you're 93 miles per hour and dropping to 91.4, you're moving from fringe average to below average on pure velo, and unless you're compensating with significant horizontal movement, cutting action, or elite sequencing, that drop has real consequences for your ability to protect secondary pitches and create swing and miss. The fastball grade right now is a 40 on the 20/80 scale, below average. And a below average fastball that is being barreled at a 10.7% clip is a fastball that opposing hitters are reading. They're timing it. And when they're timing the fastball, it opens the secondary pitches to ambush counts rather than pressure counts. Hitters lay off the breaking ball waiting for a fastball they can handle, and when McGreevy goes back to the heater, they're ready. The command profile gives a partial counterargument. A 1.9 walk rate over 56 innings is legitimately good. A 0.99 whip is a genuine reflection of strike-throwing efficiency. A 28.4% chase rate is functional. He's getting some swing decisions outside the zone. But command of a below-average fastball creates a specific vulnerability. You're throwing a pitch that isn't dominant into the zone consistently, and when hitters are making contact with it at a 41.1% hard hit rate, the command isn't protecting you the way it would for a pitcher with more carry, more life, or more deception on the heater. The strikeout rate is the other structural flag. 5.9 K9 is below average for a major league starter. That number, combined with the velocity drop and the contact quality against, tells me this is a pitcher who is relying heavily on contact management, inducing weak contact, inducing ground balls, working quickly in counts, and when the contact management breaks down, even for a 3 to 4 start stretch, the ERA will move in a hurry. Now, the career context matters here and needs to be applied honestly. McGreevy historically outperforms his xERA. His career average gap is negative 0.92, meaning he routinely posts ERAs running about a run below what xERA models project. That's real. Some pitchers have genuine skills that stabilize their results against contact. Elite sequencing, deception, ground ball tendencies that keep barrels off the board. I'm not dismissing that baseline skill. What I'm flagging is that the current gap of negative 3.45 is 2.53 runs beyond even his own career baseline. That overshoot is not explained by skill alone. It requires sequencing luck, strand luck, or both, and those variables revert. The question isn't whether McGreevy regresses to his xERA. He won't, because his historical skill provides a one-run buffer. The question is where he lands when the strand luck normalizes, and the answer is somewhere in the 4.00 to 4.50 ERA range. At a 5.9 K9 and a declining velocity profile, that's a back-end starter, a 4 or 5 in a rotation on a competitive roster. The 2025 ERA comparison is instructive. He posted a 4.42 last season. The 2.40 this year is the outlier. The 4.42 is much closer to the honest evaluation of what this pitcher does when sequencing is neutral. The velocity drop from last season makes me believe the true ERA destination in 2026 is actually north of 4.42, not south of it. For a comparable, I'd look at mid-career Aaron Harang, a starter who generated surface-level results that flattered the underlying stuff, whose velocity decline preceded a contact quality correction that eventually caught up with him. That's not a collapse comp. Harang had a long career. But Harang's ceiling in his decline phase was a 3 or 4 in a competitive rotation, and that's where the evidence points for McGreevy right now. The floor here is a fifth starter on a contending team, someone who eats innings, keeps walks low, and gives up enough hard contact to make every outing feel like a stress test. The ceiling in the current configuration is a temporary 4 starter whose ERA hovers around 4 to 4.20 in a favorable park context. That ceiling requires the velocity to stabilize or the sequencing to remain favorable. Neither is guaranteed. The barrel rate and the hard hit rate are the scouting red flags that tell me this profile is more fragile than the ERA suggests, and the upcoming regression is not a prediction, it is an accounting statement waiting to be filed. Let's start with the contact quality, because that's where the real story lives on Lance McCullers Jr. A 91.5 mile per hour average exit velocity against, a 50.5% hard hit rate, an 8.6% barrel rate. Those aren't the numbers of a pitcher who's getting squeezed by bad sequencing or a hot stretch of opposing lineups. Those are the numbers of a pitcher who is being hit hard on a consistent, repeatable basis. And when you pair that contact profile with a 1.61 HR/9 against a career average of 0.92, you stop asking whether this is a rough stretch and start asking what has changed in the repertoire that's allowing hitters to get to the ball this cleanly. McCullers is 32 years old. He debuted in 2015. He's now 11 years into a major league career with 9 full seasons of meaningful data, and the arc across that data is not ambiguous. ERA has trended upward over time. His career mark sits at 4.14, and the direction of travel has been north. The HR9 rate tells the same story, climbing steadily, now sitting at 1.62 in the current sample, nearly double his career average. These are not independent data points. They are correlated signals pointing at the same underlying issue, pitch quality erosion. For a scouting report, the question is always mechanistic. What has changed and why? McCullers built his career on a curveball that was genuinely elite, sharp, late-breaking, a true wipeout secondary. When that pitch is working, hitters chase it down and out of the zone, and his chase rate supports the idea that he's still getting some of that movement, 27.3% this season. That's not a collapse number. But chase rate tells you about pitches outside the zone. The barrel rate and exit velocity against tell you what's happening when pitchers leave something in the zone, and what's happening isn't good. The hard hit numbers indicate that either the curveball is getting less vertical movement, flatter, more hittable, or the fastball command has degraded to the point where hitters are sitting heater and getting enough of it to do damage, including 7 home runs in only 39.1 innings. The workload context compounds the concern. He's averaging 115 pitches per start over the last 30 days. That's a reasonably high pitch count, but he's thrown only 18.3 innings in that window, which tells you those pitch counts are spread over fewer innings than a healthy, efficient starter would be covering. You don't pile pitches into short outings unless you're working deeper into counts, struggling to put hitters away, or both. For a power pitcher like McCullers, extended counts usually mean the curveball isn't finishing, which forces him to go back to the heater in situations where hitters are ready for it. That's how barrels happen. The xERA is the one piece of data that creates a legitimate dissent from the hard contact narrative. At 4.39, it's running 2.47 runs better than the ERA of 6.86. The FIP sits at 3.96. On the surface, that gap invites the classic ERA deflation argument. The ERA is inflated by bad sequencing or timing. The underlying stuff is still functional. But I'd pump the brakes on leaning too hard on that framing. ERA, xERA gaps that wide frequently reflect home run suppression in the xERA model that doesn't account for individual pitch design deterioration. When your HR/9 is running at 1.62 against a career average of 0.92, the home run rate itself isn't noise, it's signal. And xERA models aren't always fast to weight current pitch quality degradation against multi-year career baselines. The FIP-ERA gap is real, but the contact data doesn't give me confidence that the FIP is telling the full story. On the 20/80 scale, what does McCullers grade out to right now? His fastball I'd put at a 45. It's functional, it still has some arm-side life, but the swing and miss profile off the four-seamer has thinned. The curveball grades at 55 in a vacuum. It's still the best pitch on the staff, but its effectiveness has become count and situation dependent in a way it wasn't 3 or 4 years ago when you could bury it in any count. Command is the wild card. When he's on, the curveball command grades 55. When he's not, it grades 40 and he's left hanging in the zone. Overall, as a starting pitcher going forward, I'd grade his current profile as a 45, a functional mid-rotation option on days when things click, a liability when they don't. The floor here is a back-end starter or a high-leverage reliever role, a conversion that wouldn't be unprecedented for a pitcher whose best weapon is a single dominant breaking ball. The ceiling, at this stage of his career, is a recaptured high 45 ERA starter who benefits from the xERA mean reversion and finishes the season closer to a 4.50 ERA with better command stretches. But I'm not projecting beyond that. The durability concern is real. He's on pace for significantly fewer innings than his career average of 90 per season, and his injury history is not clean. The comparable I'd reach for here is a slightly lesser version of Jake Westbrook's decline arc, a pitcher whose stuff was always more functionally engineered than overpowering, who aged out of the margin for error faster than the career surface numbers suggested he would. McCullers has a higher upside version of that curveball than Westbrook ever had, which is why the floor isn't the back of the bullpen quite yet. But the trajectory is pointing in that direction, and the contact quality data is the earliest indicator of where this ends up. The $17 million AAV attached to this performance is a contract year mismatch story for someone else in this building to tell. From a pure evaluation standpoint, what I see is a pitcher whose best tool is still functional, but whose supporting structure, fastball command, secondary depth, durability, has eroded enough that the best case outcome in 2026 is a serviceable back half of rotation innings eater. That's the honest scouting read. Tommy John surgery on Corbin Burnes. That is the starting point for this evaluation, and from a scouting standpoint, the surgery itself is only part of the story. The more instructive piece is what the injury history reveals about the pitcher's durability profile, and what that durability profile means for the arm that is now going to take his place in the Arizona rotation. Let's contextualize Burnes before we move to Daniel Egan, because the scouting community will be reevaluating Burnes as a long-term asset, and we should be precise about what that reevaluation looks like. He goes on to the 60-day IL, UCL involvement confirmed, Tommy John indicated. The standard recovery timeline for Tommy John is 12 to 18 months, which means, conservatively, Burnes misses the remainder of this season and is unavailable for the start of 2027. The durability red flag predates this surgery. 4 of his 8 MLB seasons have shown significantly below average innings totals. That is not a pitcher who has been consistently healthy. The Tommy John surgery does not come as a scouting surprise when you look at that usage history. A UCL under repeated stress accumulates wear that isn't always visible in the surface production, and the innings suppression over those 4 seasons may well reflect a pitcher who is being carefully managed because the medical staff already understood the structural risk in that elbow. From a tool standpoint, pre-injury Burnes graded as a genuine top-of-rotation arm, a 60 or above on the fastball grade with legitimate cutter-curve combination that generated elite swing and miss. The 0 HR/9 this season is the one data point that suggests the stuff was holding before the UCL gave way. That's actually meaningful. He wasn't in decline, he was healthy and effective, and then the structure gave out. Post-Tommy John, the evaluation question in 2027 will be whether the velocity and shape characteristics of his pitches return with sufficient quality. For a pitcher who relied on cutter life and curveball spin, UCL involvement is particularly consequential. Those pitches depend on arm side stress that the reconstructed ligament will need time to fully support. The 2027 reevaluation, when it comes, will start with a fastball velo check and spin rate comparison against his pre-injury baseline. If the cutter is back at 93 plus with the same horizontal movement profile, the ceiling reemerges. If not, the comp changes significantly. Now, Daniel Egan, this is the evaluation that Arizona needs to run right now, and this is the conversation worth having in this building. Egan is currently at AA. His future value grades at 45, which puts him in the viable 4th starter to number 5 ceiling range, a back-of-rotation innings contributor who profiles as an organizational arm at the highest upside, a swingman or long reliever at the floor. He carries a medium risk designation, which is appropriate for a AA arm with a 2027 ETA who has not yet proven himself against upper minors competition at a volume that would justify tightening the projection. The Burnes injury does not change Egan's tools, but it changes the organizational context around those tools in a way that directly affects the timeline decision Arizona now has to make. Let's grade the fastball. Egan sits 93-95 with a downhill plane that the report characterizes as a legitimate weapon. The 50-grade present value on the fastball reflects functional average big league velocity, with the delivery creating a specific angle that generates ground balls and induces weak pop-ups at the top of the zone. The 80-grade ceiling on that same pitch is an aggressive ceiling. That's a true swing and miss weapon if the velo upticks and the command sharpens. And I'd want to see that ceiling more concretely demonstrated before I put full weight on it. But the present 50 on the fastball is real. A 93-95 downhill fastball at AA throwing strikes is a legitimate big league pitch if the secondary develops. The command grade of 45 is the number I keep coming back to. That is a below average grade. In a vacuum, a 45 command for a AA arm is not disqualifying. Command development is one of the last tools to fully mature, and many pitchers who eventually develop plus command were operating at 45 or 50 grades at the AA level. But it is the specific risk vector that determines whether Egan's floor and ceiling remain stable or collapse. A 50-grade fastball with 45 command in the big leagues produces too many non-competitive pitches against major league hitters who will punish the edges of the zone when the command isn't precise. Egan needs to throw that downhill fastball to both sides of the plate with consistency, not just finding the zone but locating it to specific quadrants, before I'm comfortable projecting him as a rotation-capable starter above the fringy 4 or 5 level. The org has a 47.2% playoff odds in a contending posture right now, which means the pressure to fill the rotation isn't purely developmental, it's competitive. That creates a real tension. Egan's 2027 ETA reflects a projection based on the normal developmental arc, finishing AA, spending meaningful time at AAA, arriving in the big leagues when the command is refined and the repertoire is more fully developed. A Burns Tommy John blows that timeline open. Arizona now has to decide whether to accelerate Egan to AAA immediately, whether to give him a brief look there and call him up as an emergency starter later in the summer, or whether to find a different bridge solution, via trade acquisition or internal depth, and protect Egan's development schedule. My scouting recommendation is to resist the urge to rush him. A 45 command grade at AA is a pitcher who will be exposed by major league contact if the command doesn't improve before the call-up. A rushed call-up where Egan gets tagged in 4 or 5 starts because the command isn't ready can damage confidence and development trajectory in a way that's hard to recover from. Give him 2 months at AAA. Let the downhill fastball face AAA lineups that will test the command more aggressively. If the command moves to 50 in that window, and the stuff gives reason to believe it can, then the call-up is appropriate and the floor-ceiling projection holds. His floor, honestly assessed, is a swingman or long reliever. That 45 command in a starting role at the big league level is a real constraint. A bullpen role shortens the performance window and leverages the fastball more directly. 3 or 4 batters seeing a 93-95 downhill fastball without the concern of a third time through the order. His ceiling, if the command develops, is a number 4 or 5 starter. Someone who gives you 6 innings on a good day, generates ground balls, doesn't walk the ballpark, and gives the defense something to work with. The comparable I'd reach for is Austin Gomber, a left-handed arm, and I understand Egan is right-handed, but the profile similarity is in the pitch type and projection range. A downhill fastball, below average command at AA that eventually grades average, a back of rotation ceiling that becomes quietly useful when everything comes together. Gomber's career is instructive. The development timeline was longer than the organization initially wanted, the command took time, and the results at the big league level were consistent but unspectacular once everything clicked. That's the honest ceiling for Egan right now. If the fastball velocity upticks and the command jumps a grade faster than expected, revisit, but I'm not building a contending rotation around a 45 command arm who hasn't seen AAA yet. Watch the command progression over the next 30 days at AA. That is the scouting number that moves this evaluation. Everything else about this profile is stable. The command grade is the variable, and it's the one that tells you whether this is a summer call-up story or a 2027 story. That's the read on the day. Same game, deeper read, back tomorrow. This is Streakplot Scout. Greatness is never random.